Welcome to IMC Live, the interactive webinar series hosted by the Industrial Marketing Collective. We're here to help you connect with peers, sharpen your skills, and drive results in your work. I'm Alan Finewald, Associate Content Director at Gorilla 76, the industrial marketing agency, and one of your IMC Live hosts. In fact, I am the only host today because Peyton is out meeting her newborn niece. So congratulations to Peyton on that. I'm sure she's having a great time either holding a baby or cleaning a kitchen. Either way, she's doing the Lord's work. And today we have Stephanie and Nihal. Stephanie is a new content strategist slash writer here at Gorilla 70. Well, fairly new. You've been here around for a little while now. And of course, you all know Nihal. He is a regular guest here and also a senior content strategist slash writer at Gorilla 76. Stephanie, why don't you go first and just tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I think I'm the newest on the team, on the content team. Been here since almost coming up on a year. Can you guys believe that? This summer it'll be a year.
Has it been that
Time
long already?
flies. I know, time flies. I was just thinking about that the other day. So yeah, this is my first time being on IMC Live, so thanks for inviting me. I'm excited. Customer interviews are one of the things that I enjoy the most. Um, as a part of my job. So I'm excited to talk with Nihal and Alan about it and answer any questions you all have. So thanks for having me.
Hey guys, I'm Nihal. I've met a lot of you guys before. I am a senior writer and content strategist here, as Alan has said. And I also, aside from doing my day job, I run the Manufacturing Marketer podcast with Brendan. Alan's on there sometimes, Peyton's on there sometimes. So if you're not familiar with the podcast, also plug in that as well as another place to learn more about industrial marketing.
Yeah, it's a great show. Almost as good as this one.
Right. Almost.
Kidding, kidding, kidding. Yeah, as Stephanie said, we are talking about customer interviews today. So, of the people with their cameras on, raise your hand if you've done a customer interview in the past year. We got two. We got two. All right. Um, Raise your hand if you feel like you got the most out of that customer interview that you could have. Got no hands. All right. That's good because that's what we're talking about today is how to get more out of your customer interviews. Because leadership tends to think of these things as just testimonial mining. But we as marketers especially need to get a lot more than one testimonial out of these conversations. We need context emotionally, professionally. We need to know more about their buying process. We need to know a lot of stuff that goes beyond just something that you could put at the bottom of one of your web pages. So that is why we have two of our customer interview pros here to talk about it and what is kind of changing in customer interviews as the buying process is changing with AI and whatnot. So just to kind of set the baseline here, Nihal, why don't you start? What are you trying to do when you sit down for a customer interview, especially if it's a new client?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think there's a few things that I'm often thinking about with customer interviews. And part of the reason why I was excited to talk about this is I don't know if a lot of us have maybe already seen this, but Anthropic released a interviewer thing. They actually haven't released it yet, but basically what Anthropic did was they interviewed like 1,200 people about their feelings about AI, right? And even though that was to gather information about AI and people's feelings about AI, what Anthropic was really doing was test running their interviewer, essentially their tool to do this, right? And I think that that's quite interesting and compelling for us marketers, right? The to understand that there are now technologies that are doing mass interviews and really reducing the process of qualitative surveying into something that's like quite measurable and quite accessible. So given that that's the case, what's the point of a customer research interview? Like why do it the old-fashioned way? And I think there's a couple of reasons here, right? So to me, I think the most important thing to understand about customer research interviews is that this is not qualitative social science research. Like this is not going like if you were ever trained in social sciences, you would be asking the same set of questions to every single person. You would be trying to like understand true solid data. You are not doing that with customer research interviews, especially industrial marketing. I mean, it's amazing if you can get six of your customers to talk to you in a year, maybe, right? I mean, that would be a great thing that you did. That is not statistically significant enough for us to like make any large claims. Instead, what we should really be doing with customer research interviews is trying to ask about things that we're curious about, using things that we've learned before and like changing our questions each time to be like, how does this appeal to you? I mean, does this sound right to you? I'm often like talking a little bit too much in customer research interviews because I'm just trying to test out messaging and things like that. And that can be pretty worthwhile, I think. Does that answer your question, Alan, or did I kind of go off on a tangent here?
Well, as always, both.
Okay, great. Perfect.
That's why you're a podcaster, Nihal. Uh, so Stephanie, when you go into a customer interview, what are the things that you want to make sure you have prepared, and what are the things that you want to learn first and foremost?
Definitely. So one of the things that I always have our work off of is a list of questions just based upon like what I know about that given client. And by no means do I go down this list, right? We only have a set amount of time, and it's probably the same for you all that are on this call to extract as much information as we can. So the purpose of that list is just to really keep on track the topics that I know I want to hit. But the way that I like to structure the conversations is to really let the interviewee sort of steer the conversation. And what I've found is that if you allow them to expand in a way that's natural to them, you'll find that they either end up answering questions ahead of you asking them, or you'll notice that their answer will lead you to another question that maybe you hadn't thought about, that was interesting, or uncovers a whole nother element that maybe adds more to the conversation. Outside of that, another thing that kind of how I look at going into a customer interview is um, it kind of depends on whether this is the first customer interview for this company. Because, like Hall said, sometimes it can be hard to get multiple interviews. But one thing that I do want to note, to piggyback off of what Hall said earlier, particularly when it comes to interviewing like your second or third customer for a for a particular company, is it's a great opportunity to sort of check and balance against a previous conversation that you had. So is this a singular instance for for this customer, or is this replicatable across several people? And although I agree with Nihal, um, taking a look at it from sort of the, a sociological standpoint of research is not the correct approach in doing this. But where that kind of overlaps is that a nice way to look at customer interviews, especially if you're doing multiple for a particular client, or you might have different clients that fall within a particular industry, is to see how generalizable you can make, certain experiences. Now, of course, you don't have a large sample size that would make it, um, that would qualify this to really make a statement and say that this, applies across an industry. But if you can look for trends across different customers, that can help inform the next interview that you have, or even just allow you to get a bigger picture of that particular client and their experience within their customers.
Yeah.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, Nihal, speaking of that, um, we often hear from our clients like they don't want to say anything bad to us because we are us.
Mm.
So sometimes it's easier as the agency to be that third party, but even still, sometimes you deal with people who only want to say the positive. And to Stephanie's point, we need to understand the full process here to be able to give the right message. So how do you go about setting the table to where the customer feels comfortable giving you the full truth, even the good, bad, and the ugly?
Yeah, I think that the key here is to not open by talking about your company, right? So typically in like a 30-minute customer research interview, I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes just talking to them about their job, right? So the first question is like, tell me about your daily role and responsibilities, talking about things that make their job hard, talking about the ways that they're measuring success for themselves, right? That is just me talking to them about their job and things that they care about. I haven't even brought up the company's name yet, right? And it's only in the last like 20 minutes or so after we cover all that stuff that we can really start digging into like how this company, how my client is supporting or is not supporting those kinds of pain points that we're talking about, right? So I do think that like and again, going back to like this is not qualitative research, right? You need to make this into conversation. I think that the thing that people get a lot wrong is that like they're not like synthesizing what the customer is saying to them while they're on the call. That's like kind of a tough skill to master, but with practice, you can really do that. I think that learning how to just like be like you said earlier in this conversation that you felt overstretched by managing multiple ERPs and that you don't know how to project manage these like all of these suppliers. I'm curious about how X company do they help you with that at all? And the answer might be yes or no, right? But like we're starting from a more honest place than we would if I just walked in and be like, what do you think of this company that you agreed to do this customer research interview for, right? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I've always said the best customer interviews are almost therapeutic for everyone. I
Mhm.
think that's part of it, that being able to mirror them and show that you understand what they're saying, because that is critical for building trust, even like further down in the conversation, to get them to know that you understand where they're coming from and they don't have to, parse their words or explain something to you in a way that's going to make them feel like they can't really tell you what's going on. Stephanie, is that something that you've come across in your interviews?
Yeah, I actually just recently had an interview. Well, interestingly enough, I had a client send over customer interviews recommendations, and one of the things that he mentioned that I thought was really interesting was he said that he didn't want to send just customers that they had just an outstanding record with that was just flawless. He wanted to send over a couple of people that they had some bumps in the road with, and I think that when your clients think that way, excuse me, or if you can, if you have a way or you have that type of rapport with them where you can mention that, I think it's a really great interview to have. It's one thing to have an interview with someone that maybe is new to the company, maybe has only worked with them a handful of times, it's been pretty smooth. It adds a lot more color to the picture when you're able to talk through, hey, this was a bump that came up in the road, and this is how this client handled that. Which is really great. I've often found that, I'll agree with Nihal, part of setting up an interview in a way that you be able to extract as much as you can is really building rapport. One of the things that I always start off with in an interview is just extending gratitude for them taking out the time to speak with me, right? I'm pretty removed from their day-to-day life, right? You know that they have the client and then there's me on the other side of the client. This is the first time that they've ever met me, ever seen me, and they're taking time out of their day to sit with me to essentially help me with my job, right? And a lot of them are happy to do that because they've had such a great experience, but laying the foundation of just, being grateful and showing that you value their time, I think goes a long way. And I think too, really just having just I think just a calmness about yourself. Personally, I know that that helps in the situation when I'm talking to people. And you'll find that a lot of times people are willing to dive into that deeper. And I think the more exploratory that you begin to become with your questioning, sometimes they just naturally sort of sway in the way of, yeah, can I tell you about this like difficult time? Or really, can you be the outlet for my feedback that I have for the company? And a lot of times I'll let them know, like, once that sort of seal is broken, I'll say, hey, if there's anything else that you want to include, if there's any feedback that you have, you begin to sort of operate as an extension of that company, which helps alleviate some of those things for them as a customer, but it adds to the value that you can bring back to the customer beyond just insights. It even can come down to in some cases, actionable items that the company can take and begin to implement that helps with that customer experience moving forward.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you, Stephanie. So this is kind of skipping ahead in our outline a little bit, but Dale had a good question slash comment in the chat. Dale, do you want to come on and talk about your experience with trying to get customer interviews and how you've had luck with doing them shorter but more frequently? Because that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I don't we don't really look at them as like a once a year event where we have a big chunk of time. We're a software company, so we always have customers asking us about, different features or, hey, I'd like to see this change in the product. And so what we try to do is we have, 5 or 10 customers that we would go out to just for that and kind of query them and say, hey, we're thinking about putting this change in. Would that be helpful to you? So it's usually more driven by what customers are telling us they want. Um, because if it's something custom that nobody else really is interested in, then we have to kind of weigh whether it's worth putting it into the product. So um, I like the concept of these formal, well thought out customer interviews. I don't know that I could just talk for a half an hour. I'd have to be very structured in what I ask because I want to respect my customer's time. But I do like the comment that Nahal said that um, once you start talking to people, things really kind of come out. And I think it's good to not just talk about business all the time, but get into personal things too, because that does come into play sometimes. But our interaction is probably a lot more frequent, but it's much shorter time frames. And it's
Yeah,
only usually when I have something I think would help them. It's that they might be interested in.
mm,
That makes
totally.
sense.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, Dylan. I think you're bringing up a good point here about how our strategy for customer research interviews, I do think they need to change depending on what kind of company that you have, right? So I would say that like these kinds of like formal interviews for 30 minutes where we really dig deep into, the customer and what they're thinking about and their pain points. I think that this is extremely useful for a lot of industrial companies, but I would say that like my thinking about these have changed slightly for like more commodity focused clients is what I would call them, right? So like, if you're like a pipe supplier, right, where it really does just come down to like lead time and price, like that's literally the only thing that matters to you. I would say that like maybe it is actually fine to do a shorter customer interview where you're just really testimonial seeking. Like this goes so against what we're talking about for these other kinds of customer interviews where like we're actually actively not trying to just testimonial seek. But depending on like the kind of business you have, I do think it's like important to like think about what are you trying to get out of this kind of exercise, right? So yeah, I think that makes a lot of
Is this something that you typically do when, as an agency, you're getting involved with a customer for the first time? So you're trying to understand their customers. Is that typically how you all do it? Like for an in-house
Yeah.
person that has had a customer or a set of customers for 10 years. I mean, a lot of our customers have been with us for 10 years. I kind of know them.
Mhm.
I don't, I they've been a customer for a long time. They wouldn't have been if it wasn't kind of working. So is this more relevant to an agency coming in to start
Yeah,
Yeah.
out or
I think that definitely like for our process, kind of behind the curtain, we do try to start every new client relationship with customer interviews.
Mhm.
And to your point, if you know your customers really well, like you go to barbecues with them or whatever it is, you probably already know a lot of the stuff that we would be really trying to find. But we've come to find that with a lot of the clients we have, that they might have a customer for 10 years, but they know nothing about them. Like
Mhm.
they don't know what keeps them up at night. They don't really even know why they're a customer.
Right.
So that's where this kind of stuff really becomes valuable because it's just there's a level of detachment in so many companies between the customer and even sales.
Yeah, and I would say even strategically, right? So I agree with you, Dale, that like, honestly, on the agency side, it is most useful just for me to like learn what's going on. But I could learn that from just talking to like people at the company themselves, right? I could learn that just from talking to the client all day. But what I find really useful with customer research interviews, which I think will be useful for in-house marketers as well, is that it gives you like kind of ammunition in terms of like how to defend your decisions on messaging, right? So like insofar as I say we need to go in this direction with positioning and messaging, that doesn't mean anything unless I have customer research data often to like back that up, right? Like that actually needs to be the place where like oftentimes when I'm putting together a messaging arc document, right, I'm saying like this comes from a quote from this person. And if the client or whoever in leadership wants to disagree with it, they're free to, but they have to first explain why this customer says this, and then they have to like make that decision after that, if that makes sense. Mhm.
Yeah. And
Another thing,
Meg,
oh, go
oh,
ahead.
go on, Stephanie.
No, I was just going to mention too, Dale, another thing that might be interesting, especially with your setup of you sort of having like this ongoing long relationship with your customers already, um, utilizing these customer interviews. One of the things that I get from our customer interviews, and again, we're a little different. We're trying to understand our client's customer, right? But one of the things that I've been able to dive into is like and this is how an element of how I approach these conversations too. Is like how can I gain some of your some insight on your competition and how well you're stacking up against them? How well do you solve issues in comparison to how they're solving issues? Now, I'm not sure with your customers if, say for instance, one of our I might have a customer interview with someone where our client is one of many suppliers that they work with. So then in that instance, I can get a really good gauge on one to one or one to many, how well they handle things or what their lead times look like in comparison, their availability, their customer service. Um, if you are like the sole person that they're going to, that might be a little difficult. But if your customers, if you have that rapport to where they would be transparent enough to let you know that, then that might be a good use of time is just to get a gauge on, their thoughts in terms of how you stand up against the competition, what you're doing well, what they'd like to see done better, and maybe even have exploratory conversations just around getting a gauge on how they're perceiving the industry, and being able to sort of pivot around those things too. Those are the things that came top of mind as you said that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephanie, because often when we're talking with clients, they will not have a great idea of what the competitor is even doing. Like I'll ask, how do you stack up against your main competitor in this area? And they will say, well, I don't know. They won't tell us. Especially with the secretive industries. But when you're just letting a customer talk, sometimes they'll talk their way into giving you that information without even realizing it. And then at that point, you can follow up with them like, well, you already said this. So can we clarify something a little bit? And that'll open the door to some conversations that, your sales team might not be having, or, whoever is following up with these people most often might not be having. Megan had a question in the chat. Megan Bernie, do you want to come on and say it live, or would you prefer me to say it?
I can come on and ask. So I just had mentioned that I'm curious what everyone is doing if they're traveling to customer facilities or if you're doing interviews via online, just because for us, a lot of our customers are in very remote locations and we provide our equipment all around the world as well. So then language becomes a barrier for certain interviews. And so I just was curious how maybe Gorilla 76 normally does it, and then maybe some other people in this room.
Yeah, that's a good question, Megan. So I would say that for the vast majority of the time, right, we're doing these purely online. I've had a few exceptions, especially with one client of ours who had a really hard time getting customer research, but it was very important to them. So what they would do is that basically when they would go on distributor visits, right? Like the distributor just knew a customer and then they would just go to the customer and they would just call me in and I would do this remotely from where they're at, right? So like we've done that before and that's been kind of a logistical sort of thing. It wasn't too difficult, but we've done that historically. But I would say doing this online seems to be the most common way I would say industry-wide to do this. I think it's just the most convenient way. It's funny, you'll end up a lot of times with like a lot of these customers that we talk to, they're like older, close to retirement, they like spend a good portion of their time complaining about Zoom and how they hate how everyone works from home now. So, I mean, that does come up sometimes, but I do find it to be like the most convenient way to do this. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts, but
Yeah, we tends to be a lot smaller ask, I guess, and we tend to just start shortening the amount of time we're asking for as they, show any interest, but also show that they are not really willing to accept yet is like, well, can you just give me 15 minutes for a chat? Like you have that with your cell phone company all the time, like it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
yeah.
And that usually helps alleviate something that came up in the chat earlier, the need to try to have a sweetener, like a gift card or something. Is we just say is like, it's not a big deal. It's not like, you don't need to get compensated for this because it's that chill. But nothing against you using that as a tactic if possible. I think that there was a question in the chat about how that affects for tax purposes, which I have no idea about. So if anyone wants to answer that in the chat for them, that would be great. But I also love the point that Laura made in there about how you can start through Zoom, and then if they turn out to be a great testimonial, then you can maybe then try like, oh, this went so well, I'd love to do it in person. And kind of continue from there to get more out of that conversation. Stephanie, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah. The only other thing that I feel like worth mentioning when it pertains to Zoom calls in particular, Megan, is the key benefit that I find for that is that you can record them. So you don't have to find yourself asking, like, did I take good enough notes when I was there in person? Obviously, you can audio record, but even with some of the capabilities built into Zoom, it's really nice to have like the transcript up as the video is going, just to be able to jump to different things. So, in terms of being able to go back and review what you've already gone over, That's a huge advantage for Zoom, but obviously there are advantages of going in person too.
Yeah. You mentioned the language barrier thing occasionally coming up, and I've tried to do customer interviews with a really big language barrier, and it was painful for both parties. I would think, but Nihal, you've got a bit more, yeah,
Yeah.
credence in that. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do customer interviews in Spanish and English. So, and I would say that like my Spanish is not perfect, right? It's good enough. But I do think that like if you have that ability within your company to like have people who do speak the language. So, I will say that like the Spanish interviews I've done, they aren't even for my clients, right? It's like other people like Gorilla who need like someone to help speak Spanish, and then I'll do that for them. And it's not really a big deal because I think like I forget who said this in the chat. It was Rachel, right? Like Rachel said, a great strategy on these interviews is just letting the people say whatever they want to say, and then just following up from there, right? Insofar as the customer is obsessed with X issue in this conversation, like that's interesting to me in and of itself. Um, yeah, and I would say though that like in general, like if you can speak in the customer's native language, like that's ideal. Um, but I don't know. I don't know exactly, Megan, how many different languages people are speaking for you guys. I don't know if you have the ability to do that, but if you do, like I do think that like even if you can ask someone who on your team who just speaks the language, even if they're not trained to do this, it can just be kind of a nice thing to have in your back pocket as well.
Yeah,
Um,
Nihal, follow up. Would you rather, if you could choose, have someone on your team who doesn't speak the language or a third party who speaks the language that you can coach?
yeah, like you mean in terms of a third party, just like bringing someone else from your company
Yeah,
who's
a translator or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could go either way. I would say that at the end of the day, right, like these aren't really high stakes conversations, right? I think it's important for us to even emphasize that in the email or the initial outreach, to just be like, this is an informal 30-minute conversation. You have absolutely nothing to prepare for. Um, and it's mostly just like what's most convenient for you guys. I would just say like think about like what's most convenient, but don't be afraid of a language barrier as being an issue necessarily, especially if your customer base is worldwide. You're gonna want content, you're gonna want perspectives from people who do speak different languages too as well. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So great, Nihal. Thank you. We've got some other questions in the chat coming in hot and heavy. So, Patrick, would you like to come on and ask your question?
Sure. Can you see me okay?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hi. So, I've done a few customer interviews and, well, more than a few, but usually the language of a conversation and the cadence of the conversation makes sense in context where there's a lot of there's a lot of backtracking, like people change their minds mid-sentence, right? So when you're transcribing that and you want to use a customer quote, do you guys edit the passage to be more to like flow better, or do you use it verbatim when you're quoting someone?
So we would definitely edit it slightly, right? So we kind of follow, I think, like, and Alan, you've been a journalist, right? So you can say exactly the rules here, but like we follow like journalistic convention, which is to say that like, in newspapers, you don't really see people say, or in like their quotes necessarily, because these journalists are lightly editing it to like make the sentence sound right. I try to be a little bit cautious, I would never like cut out a whole sentence. I would like put an ellipses in there between some brackets just so it's clear that I'm not like totally misusing a customer's words. Um, but I will say though that like when it comes to like there's a difference between like what I provide internally to clients with like a call report where like I'm pretty close to like what they're saying, except I'm editing out the ums and the you knows for clarity. And what I might use is like if something from this interview comes out as testimonial, I might edit that a little bit more heavily and then just message the person and be like, hey, this is what I have recorded. Does this sound all right with you? And if they give me approval, then we can run with that, right? So I think people also want to sound as smart as they can when they're getting their stuff published too. So you can use that to your advantage for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. Like you're doing them a favor and you a favor when you put it in the way they what they were trying to say, you know. If as long as you're not misrepresenting them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when it comes to the sound bites, like if you are trying to get audio, something that I'll do is I'll hear, oh man, that was almost a good answer. Like that was so close. Like I could taste the sound bite, and then oh, they lost it at the tail end. And I'll just at the end be like, oh hey, you mentioned this thing. And I just wondered if you could tell me that one more time. Like you could be specific, like, hey, like, could you, like, you almost said that right? Could you please, like, if you're being that open with them about like we're doing sound bites and they're like comfortable with that, but it might even be better to not mention any of that and just be like, hey, can you just answer that one more time? Because once someone has had the chance to go through the thought once, they're probably going to be able to spit it out a lot clearer the second time around. Stephanie, did you have any more thoughts on that?
No, I totally agree with what you and Nihal said around cleaning it up, especially if you're publishing it and it reads better. People are going to be more receptive. It's going to look more polished, especially if you're putting it on like a client website. It just looks more buttoned up that way. Um, Whereas if you're like sharing it directly with the client, you have a little bit more leniency to make it sound a little bit more natural to what they actually said. But yeah, most definitely cleaning it up. There's nothing wrong with that. Just as long as you're not, like they said, changing the content or context of what they said, that's fine.
Yeah. And the only thing I would make sure that you would want to keep in mind is that you're not eliminating your voice of customer. You want these to sound like people. They're useless if they're not believable. So you can't edit them to the point that it doesn't sound like them talking, or you almost defeat the purpose.
Yeah.
Tom had another good question in the chat. Tom, do you want to come on and ask that?
Sure. I'm here in the office, so I'm going to be a little discreet on the question. Um,
Okay.
so let it speak for itself on there. But I just that doing customer interviews is newish, around here, and um, as in we don't really do it. So just wanted to get tips on how, and then the second part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how much you can talk about this, Tom, just given the environment, but I was curious to when I read your question, where is that hesitancy like seated within? Is it just you all don't interact with the customers as much, and maybe that sort of is a roadblock? Are you finding
I
any
think I
particular
think
thing?
maybe I think maybe that it's we value technical expertise when it comes to interacting with customers. So somebody like me, though I'm learning a lot about the technical side, there's just that trust,
Yeah.
wanting to be able to trust that there's nothing getting mixed up, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say there's two things I have about that, right? So the first one is I guess and broadly in terms of like how do you convince leadership that like it's okay to do these customer interviews? I mean, I think you could cite for them. First of all, I would frame it maybe as customer engagement, right? Like that's a kind of a sleazy way to frame this in some way, but I do think it is actually quite true because you are engaging with them at a certain level. And also like something that I've seen from customer interviews is that like I've done customer interviews for people and they've left like Google reviews for the client because they were just like they had such a interesting experience talking about their experience with the client that they just felt the need to like write a Google review, just say like how much they enjoyed this company, right? So like sometimes actually reaching out and asking just can you talk about your experience can like actually excite them. I feel like we frame it as like, oh, it's like a big ask, we're wasting people's time. And that's just not always the case. People actually do enjoy talking about their experience, things like that. But I think your second point here, Tom, about like expertise. I mean, I think this is a really good point, and it's something that like I imagine a lot of our clients deal with a lot, given that like we're an external agency, we're not experts at this stuff, and regardless of whether or not like the customer we're interviewing knows that like we are a third party agency, which they should, they still kind of assume that we're associated with the client, and they don't want like there's probably some hesitancy over like, oh, is it okay to have these third parties talking to our customers? And what I would say here is I would never overstate my expertise, but I definitely don't like pretend I definitely don't like confess that I don't know what I'm talking about, right? So like I think that one tactic that I often use is like kind of what you would call like a shibboleth, if I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term, but basically what that means it's like an in-group word that like indicates that I'm part of your group, right? So like I guess like if I was working for if I was writing about aluminum extrusions, I might use like a really like in-depth under like a word that like signals some familiarity with like a kind of press in some way, right? That gets customers to talk more technically and kind of assume that I already know what I'm talking about, right? I wouldn't call that manipulative. I would say that like I'm actually using things that I already know about. But it is actually a good idea for first of all, the customer is the one who's talking the entire time, so it's not like you're gonna expose yourself too much. But it can be useful to like figure out when to leverage naivete and leverage technical expertise in order to get the kinds of answers you're looking for. I don't know if I'm fully answering your question here, but it's kind of an interesting line of thought to go down.
Yeah. Stephanie, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. So at the face of it, at the top of this funnel is sort of building that trust between like your I think you said like leadership, I think was the word that you used. Um yeah, leadership and like what building their trust in you being able to speak directly with the customer. I think the low-hanging fruit in my mind would be as you're and I'm thinking about this from the way that we sort of tackle customer interviews and like what we've been talking about getting out of them. The low-hanging fruit of solving that issue is to speak with somebody that's more technical on your team around what the customer's pain points are. It's a really easy way to say, hey, I have a foundational understanding about what the customer journey looks like. What are the things, the road bumps that they, are encountering? And it doesn't require you to, like, so to speak, skill up and have to understand the language and with such depth, right? Because at its nature, a customer interview is something that really anybody can conduct because, as Nihal was saying earlier, it's supposed to be a natural conversation. If you come in overly technical, you're probably not going to get the same answers as you do for more of a casual conversation that you're having with someone. And the things that you're looking to get out of it. It's not a sales conversation. It's not a platform for you to prove that you know so much about this, any particular thing. I think from what I gather, you're on the marketing team for your company. Is that correct, Tom? Or
The marketing person.
Okay, so then that in itself gives you even more of a starting foundation than even we might have because we're removed, right? We are representing our client in this customer interaction, whereas you sort of wear the business's emblem. You're part of the team. So I would assume that from the customer's perspective, the perception is that you know about the industry enough to be able to have a conversation with them about that. So I think that if the leadership is reluctant because they're worried about your expertise, I think just having a conversation with the people that are experts on the team about this particular customer, what do they typically buy from us? What is their buying experience been like? I mean, we talked a little bit about AI earlier. It takes all of 2 minutes to say, what are the typical pain points around buying for X custom, and for customer in X industry? And then you can take that to someone that's an expert on your team and check and balance that against them before reaching out. I think the other side of that coin that I was thinking about too, when talking to leadership about adopting things that they might be hesitant about, is to really come at it from the perspective of this is what we're standing to gain as a company if you all are open to something like this. Outside of getting better insights within how, the way that your customers are thinking about the industry, this, as we kind of discussed, this is a really great way for you to catch things before they become larger problems, especially because you were on the team. So things that are being uncovered during the conversation around, well, we really could use you all to go, work the process this way. This would be better for us. Or where we were a little bit concerned about the way that this happened. This is a way for you to keep that conversation going and build rapport over time, be able to catch things before they happen, or be able to tailor you all's processes to what the customers actually need. So it's an ongoing pulse that you have on your customer that you can speak to as an advantage of you doing this when you're talking to leadership about it.
Yeah, good. Those are good points. And the other thing I would say is at a certain level, like there's a certain level of technical expertise that you don't need to have the conversation because no matter what, you can always just follow anything with how does that make you feel? And you are getting the context you're actually trying to get out of the conversation. Like let the engineers have that conversation with them. You're having a different talk. How easy it is to convince leadership is different on that one. Luke, you had a kind of block and tackle playbook for this for us. You want to come on?
I just had I had a we're an EOS company. I had a rock this quarter. And Tom, when you said this, it just popped into my head as something that is so simple. And Stephanie, you kind of said like stay natural, and that's what I'm talking about here. So I had a rock to thank our top 100 customers from last year, like the top 100 revenue producing customers. So I did not set 30-minute meetings. I didn't send out emails. I just picked up the phone and called them and said thank you. And people just start barfing out feedback. I didn't have a script. I said thank you, and then I say, how are we doing? Is there anything we can do to improve, or product, people, process, whatever it is, like give it to me. Some of them didn't pick up because obviously you're kind of cold calling, but you're cold calling people you know. Some of them picked up and said, thank you for saying thank you. I got to go. And some of them stayed on the phone for 30 minutes. So it doesn't have to be some big scripted thing. People like to be thanked. You don't have to send them a gift card or a hat in the mail. If they say they want one, I'd probably send them one anyways. But it can be as simple as that, as like leading with a thank you and letting it grow from there.
Yeah, and Jennifer had a good thank you oriented system too. Jennifer, would you want to come on and talk about that? Jennifer Ray? Okay. Oh, nope, sorry. Okay. So yeah, she just pointed out that they send thank you emails and ask for the customer has pictures of their product in action, which is great because the one thing that I hate hearing the most is we don't have any product photos. That is the worst. And ask if they're interested in providing, further testimonials and stuff. That's a great follow-up system. Love that. Okay, so wow, oh my God, there's only 2 minutes left in our regularly scheduled programming, and I've got a whole thing I want to make sure we talk about real quick. And that is the AI of it all. And one thing that I think is important that we add to our customer interviews is just figuring out how their buying process is changing and how it could continue to change in the foreseeable future. Nihal, do you want to touch on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of mentioned this a little bit with the Anthropic thing, but again, I do think that like AI is going to automate a lot of general qualitative information gathering, right? I imagine actually that like this interviewer tool from Anthropic is going to be like, again, like we've already been selling all of our data for a long time. This is another way to collect data. I do think it's going to like really make a lot of that. We're gonna have a lot more interesting data, I think, coming out of these kinds of tools. That hasn't launched yet. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be something that like individual companies are going to do so much as just like broader think tanks or firms or marketing research consultancies. But I think that in general, like I do think that like the place of actually having these human conversations is like thinking about like, okay, insofar as AI automates some of that basic information gathering from like what matters to you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, how do you turn customer research into an opportunity to like explore real strategies, explore things in depth, and just get a little bit more smarter about it, right? Like, I'm an AI doomer for a lot of things, but definitely not for this. I think it's like a great opportunity for us to like really think about customer research as, being that place to really um, put your strategic thinking on and test out ideas. I think they can be really exciting for all of us, honestly.
Yeah, great point. Stephanie, you got anything before we head out?
Hmm. No. I think this was an amazing conversation, and I'm grateful to you guys for being so engaging in the comments and hopping on and sharing your thoughts with us.
All right. Well, if anyone does have any lingering questions or thoughts, where can they get in touch with you two? Nihal, where are you
LinkedIn.
at?
Well,
Oh,
I'm certainly not really on LinkedIn or anywhere else, but please email podcast@gorilla76.com if you ever want to show up on the Manufacturing Marketer or listen to the show. And also, you can always just reach out to Alan or someone and get in touch with me if you ever want to talk anything about marketing, seriously.
For
Mhm.
sure. I
Steph.
second that. I'm getting better at being more engaged on LinkedIn. Doesn't that sound funny as a millennial? So reach out to me. I was tagged on the initial post on G76's page, so feel free to connect with me there. And if you have anything that comes up that you want to talk about or get my thoughts on, or just want to say, hey, message me on there.
Okay, perfect. Well, I believe that's it for today then. Thanks for joining us at the thank you for joining us at the Industrial Marketing Collective live today. Stephanie, Nihal, you did a great job. And if anyone wants to also get in touch with us, you can always join the Industrial Marketing Collective. We've got all stuff going on there all the time. And our next IMC Live will be April 16th. And we will be covering a highly requested topic. So everyone should be really excited to talk about e-commerce in B2B. So we're going to sit down with e-commerce division manager Tyler Simmons to discuss how Energy Management Corporation built out a highly successful e-commerce program at vfds.com. It's going to be a great talk, and we hope to see you all there. And until next time.